In this section, we will be learning about relative and cumulative frequency distributions. And still using our previous example, once a group frequency distribution has been constructed, it is also easy to add columns for the cumulative, relative, and cumulative relative frequencies. These are things we actually learned in our previous discussions. So try to also recall how are cumulative frequencies being, or how are they computed. Basically, you will just be adding the frequency starting from the lowest group frequency distribution or class interval, and the computation for the relative frequency is basically frequency over n, which is, in the example, we have the frequency column. We just refer to what particular frequency or class interval are we referring to, and then we would divide um, the total number of scores, which is 25 in this case, and we would also be getting the relative frequency. And also we are reminded with the cumulative relative frequency, wherein we just have to check on the lowest class interval, and then we add the relative frequency from the higher class interval, and that's how we get our cumulative relative frequency. So let's go now to our cumulative percentage distribution. Perhaps the most useful table of all is one that shows cumulative percent frequencies, because that table alone allows us to find percentile ranks and percentiles. The cumulative percent of frequencies for the midterm scores are basically shown here in this example. It is important to note that the cumulative percentage entry for a particular interval corresponds to the upper real limit of that interval. For example, across the interval 85 to 89, the CPF percentage is the CPF entry of 80. This only means that a score of 89.5 is the 80th percentile. You may be asking, where did I get the 89.5? So you just actually have to look into the separate column, which is the URL, which is the upper real limit, and that class interval 85 to 89 has that URL or upper real limit of 89.5. So having identified that 89.5 is the 80th percentile, we would somehow understand that to score better than 80% of those in our class, a student must have a score that beats not only all the scores below 85 to 89 interval, but all the scores in 85 to 89 interval. And the only way a student can be sure of beating all the scores in the 85 to 89 interval is to score at the top of that interval, which is 89.5. On the other hand, if you wanted to know what your percentile rank would be if you scored about 79.5 in the midterm, you would look at the cumulative percent frequency entry for 75 to 79 interval, which tells you that the percentile rank is 24, which would somehow tell you that you have beaten 24% of the group. Now, if you wanted to know the percentile rank for a score of 67 or 81, or you wanted to know what score was at the 40th percentile, you could not find that information directly in this example table. However, you could use a graph to help you estimate these answers, or you could also use linear interpolation more directly. And this is one topic that we will also discuss in our next video lecture.